It's funny, this last week I was listening to Tom Hughes, who knows him, listens to him, and Lee Brainerd.
Yep.
And
He's so good.
yeah, they're good. Tom Hughes has like 2 or 3 podcasts a week, which I have no idea how he does something like that. But of course, he has guests and he talks about the end times, he relates scriptures to it, and he's a Calvary pastor. But the reason I bring that up is because some of my weird, aberrant, strange beliefs, he was like, yeah, some things I believed when I first started, being raised in Calvary. And I think Calvary's a great, denomination. I'm not trying to put it down. He says, I've changed. I thought, wow, like no man knows the day or the hour does not refer to the rapture. It refers to the second coming. I guess he read it in context. And one of the reasons that Lee Brainerd gave was, well, because it's revealed as a mystery in 1 Corinthians 15:51. Behold, I tell you a mystery. We shall not.
What is revealed as mystery?
The rapture. So in other words, if it's revealed as a mystery 20 years after the Gospels, then it couldn't be in the Gospels. Okay? Very simple reasoning. And another thing they talked about was one taken, one left does not refer to the rapture either, Matthew 24 and Mark 13. Okay? It refers to people being taken to Armageddon. And the reason they gave was because in Luke, when it says one's taken and one's left, in Luke they ask a question. And this is exactly the reasons I gave. They ask a question like, one's taken, one's left. You go to the Luke passage, where, Lord? And remember what his answer was? Where the vultures are, where the corpses are, there the vultures will gather. And so they're taken to Armageddon. Hanukkah? Is that a Bible holiday?
No, but Jesus celebrated it.
John 10, Jesus was, at the Feast of Dedication, and it was winter. And we know from that that was Hanukkah. He was celebrating Hanukkah, okay? And did you know there's a prophecy in the Bible about Hanukkah? Yeah, Daniel 12. There's an obscure prophecy that people look at and say, what does this mean? He said, blessed is he that attains the 1,335 days. And when you figure out what he's talking about, it all makes sense, which I'm not going to tell you now. Shmita. It's the Hebrew word, okay? And Shmita just refers to the 7th year of a 7-year cycle. That's all it refers to. A Shmita cycle is 7 years. So just like 7 days in a week, right? And then the 7th day is called what?
The day of rest.
Sabbath. And in fact, when God did the days and months, he only gave one of them a name. But when you look at it, you say, well, what about Adar? What about this Nisan? That's stuff they picked up in pagan lands. He only called the 7th day a Sabbath. Now, there's 7 years, and he called the 7th year a Sabbath. And that's the Shmita. Okay? Now, that first occurs in Deuteronomy 15:1. First mention, principle of first mention, which is usually an important thing. He says, at the end of every 7 years, you shall make a release. Okay? And that word for release is Shmita. At the end of every 7 years. So there's a cycle of 7 years. All right? And the 7th year is the Shmita. So the whole 7 years is a Shmita cycle. Then you have 7 cycles of cycles. Got it? 7 Shmita cycles, which is how many years? 49. Oh, is there a cycle of 7 weeks somewhere? Where? No, that happens annually? Yes, Pentecost. You had the counting of the Omer, and that's for 7 sevens, 49 days, and the 50th day is what? Pentecost.
So what you're saying for that is that right after the first fruits, then you counted 50 days in Pentecost.
Yes. So my whole point is God works in patterns, right? And we've went over that ad nauseum for a year and a half. All the patterns. It becomes obvious, it becomes obvious, it becomes obvious. And so my question is, oh, you know what? The first 4 feasts were fulfilled in order and on the day. Do you think the last 3 would be fulfilled in order and on the day? Day of Atonement is what? Yeah, 10 days after. What does it represent? What fulfills it? Yeah, the tribulation period, 7 years. And then after that is Tabernacles, which is fulfilled by what?
Second coming.
Nope. Second coming happens at the end of Day of Atonement, which is the 10th day. 5 days later, Tabernacles happens, and that's the millennial kingdom. You knew that.
I knew that.
Okay. So why is there... Okay, I hope I passed the test. Why is there a 5-day gap between Jesus' return and the beginning of the millennial kingdom? Matthew 25, when the king returns and sits on his glorious throne, he's going to have the goats on his left, the sheep on his right. Because is the millennial kingdom for goats? No. He's got to judge the goats, send them away, okay? And then you can, so that takes 5 days, apparently, because then you have the beginning of the millennial kingdom. So that's why there's that delay. So there's some misnomers there like, well, the tribulation period begins at the rapture. Is that true?
No, it begins with the...
Yeah, so if you look at the chart that Lisa made, right here, trumpets, that's the rapture. That's the first day of the 7th month. 10 days later, the 10th day of the 7th month, is the beginning of the trib. So there's a 10-day period there. And I'm going to show you how that fits in with everything. Why is there a 10-day period? You would think the rapture and then the tribulation, right? And you would think the second return and then the millennial kingdom right then. No, there's little periods of time. And when you go through the whole thing, it makes perfect sense. All right. So now we have the Shmita,
Well,
which...
Were you going to share that?
No.
Okay.
No, I'm just whetting your appetite. I got to wait till the feast template when I put everything together. That's just to give you a little preview. Everything, if you use the feast template, everything, when the 2 witnesses die and they're resurrected on a day that refers to them in a certain feast. I mean, on and on. Okay? It just goes, it's just ridiculous when God was showing me all these things. And the funny thing is, there's really nobody using the feast template today. And it just befuddles me. If you start the tribulation period on the Day of Atonement, and then you count up the different days, they always come out on a feast or an important day. Like in the middle of the tribulation, for instance, let me show you this. Remember, this is the tribulation. How long is the tribulation? Which is really not. Yeah, it's really Daniel's 70th week. Yeah, 1,260 days here, right? 1,260 days here. Now, okay, 1,260 days, 1,260 days. Right in the middle, according to Daniel 9, come on, you guys should know that by now. 9:27, okay? In the midst of the week, right in the middle of the week, comes one who's going to set up the abomination of desolation, right? Right here. So, with that abomination, and I forgot why I was doing this.
You were going to show us two prophets. Thank you.
Oh, okay. And then the 2 prophets have to prophesy in the first half. So right here is the abomination of desolation, and so many, that is the key event in end time prophecies, right? Matthew 24:15, right? Matthew 24:15. But when you see the abomination of desolation, you who are in Judea, flee to the mountains. And then everything changes. Now this is actually, we should call the 7-year trib, we call it 7-year trib. We should call it Daniel's 70th week, right? Because Daniel's 70th week. Because the Great Tribulation only refers to what? Yes. The Great Trib refers right here to the last part. And I'm not so sure, I'm still working on it. When it refers to the day of the Lord, a lot of people put it right here, all 7 years. I'm not so sure if it refers just to that second half. You know why? Because he's going to send you Elijah the prophet before the great and terrible day of the Lord. Get it? So if it refers to this half, that means he's going to be over here. It's going to be before. Anyways, just little technical things. Uh-huh.
Because Elijah's going to be one of the...
Yes.
You have
I
to fill it in
think,
the blank.
okay. So who's the two witnesses?
Moses and Elijah.
Okay, why do I say that? Anybody give me reasons? Is that just kind of random and what? Yes, to the Jews, who's the prophet? Elijah, or Eliyahu, as I like to say. And then who's the law? Moses. So right there's the law and the prophets. Who was on the Mount of Transfiguration when they were transported unto, he says, Jesus said before they went up there, truly I say to you, there's some standing here who shall not die until they see, me coming in glory. When did that happen? When they went on the Mount of Transfiguration. Who was up there with them? Elijah. Because it was kind of like a preview of the tribulation period and the stuff that was going to happen. Who's the last two people mentioned in Scripture in Malachi?
Elijah and Moses.
Yes. Remember the law of Moses. Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the great and terrible day of the Lord. So, and then all the miracles mentioned of the two witnesses in Revelation 11, who can you attribute all those miracles to? Elijah and Moses. So God has given us clues through there. So and who had unusual deaths in the Old Testament? Elijah and Moses. So as you go through it, it's just like, well, Elijah, remember what happened to him? He was raptured. Yeah, he never died. And then Moses, he actually was taken out by God and buried somewhere out in the mountains. And the weird thing was in the book of Jude. Yeah, Michael and Satan are fighting for his body. It's almost like Satan comes to get the body and that's his job. And there's the archangel Michael saying, no, you're not going to take this. Why? What does it matter? Right? So there's something strange going on there. So Moses and Elijah is, and I have a bunch of other reasons, but I'm not going to get into that now. So you have the Shmita. The Shmita is that 7-year cycle. It's called a rest. It's called a Sabbath. Okay? It starts, when does the Shmita start? So Rosh Hashanah is their New Year's, and that's when the Shmita cycle starts, except for one time, which we've talked about that before. Okay. Now, the Shmita is so important that in Leviticus 26:33 through 34, okay, God predicted that they were going to violate it and he was going to judge them. Okay? So we think, what's the big thing about the Shmita? And some people say it's only a Jewish thing, right? It was originally, but then I'm going to show you, I had to go back through it and refigure the Shmita and do all my research. And there seems to be this financial reckoning that happens every 7 years. Oh, we're in a Shmita year now. Do you guys think that there's going to be major economic things happening this year?
Already.
Could be. Why were they exiled to Babylon for 70 years? Remember Nebuchadnezzar, the book of Daniel? Why was it 70 years? Yes. They did not keep the Shmita, the 7th year, where they're supposed to let the ground lie fallow, and they're supposed to forgive all the debts. They didn't keep it for 490 years. How many Shmitas is that? 70. And the Bible explicitly tells us that's why they were in Babylon 70 years. And in Jeremiah too. Okay? And in fact, there's a guy named Daniel who was in Babylon at that time reading, guess who? Who was a contemporary. He actually had his writings up there in Babylon. Jeremiah was back in Jerusalem. Okay? He was reading him and he realized, oh my gosh, we're almost at the end of this. And then that motivates him to pray in Daniel 9. And then a man comes to him. I'm going to trick you here. Who was the man who came to him? Gabriel. Okay, I didn't trick you. Because that's what it called the angel, a man. So then the man, Gabriel, came to me and gave him what I think is the most important prophecy in the whole Bible. Right? Daniel 9:24 through 27. Remember, you got to learn that if you have any hope of keeping prophecy straight. So if you ask somebody who says they know prophecy, well, what about Daniel 9:24-27? They say, well, I don't know. That's a mystery. Forget it. They're hopelessly entangled in modern theology. Okay? Hopelessly entangled in it. Okay, so here's the financial factor. Deuteronomy 15:1 and 2. He says, at the end of every 7 years, you shall make a release, a Shmita. And this is the manner of the release. Every creditor that lends something to his neighbor shall release it. He shall not exact it of his neighbor or his brothers, because it is the Lord's release or Shmita. So every 7 years, if someone owed you money, on that 7th year, you had to forgive it. Okay?
Wait, really?
Yeah. I know. So if it was the 6th year, you'd probably be kind of reluctant to, right? To do it. For that reason. And actually, God warns about that in the law. Don't be counting the years and then, refuse to lend if a brother's really in need. If he's really in need. Okay? Yes, Daniel chapter 12, he said, seal up the book of Daniel, until the end of time. He says, which means at the end times it's going to be unsealed. Right? He says knowledge would increase, and that people would run to and fro, and knowledge would increase. And actually, that word for knowledge is articulated. It's like ha. Remember, Yeshua, ha, Mashiach means what? The Messiah. Jesus the Messiah. Ha means the. In the Hebrew, it's actually ha da'at, which is the knowledge. He's talking about not just knowledge in general, which it does refer to that too, but knowledge of the book, of the Bible. And today we're in a revival of getting back to like more a Hebraic understanding of the Bible. And we're starting to understand, and things are opening up. Like I say, you can't unravel that 1,335 days unless you understand a Hebraic background and what happened in Daniel 11. And then where it leads to another Jewish feast and stuff. And why it went from a certain event to that Jewish feast. And no, I'm not going to tell you. My question is, we have our kind of sterile Gentile rules. All right. Most of them are for the Reformation period, and a lot of those were godly men. But then they set down these rules in a totally Gentile context, Greek thinking and all that, which some of them are good. Okay. But then we kind of have an either or. So here's my question. Okay. 49 year versus a 50 year. Okay. So if you read the scripture on the Shmita cycle, it says this in the year Jubilee. This is Leviticus 25. Okay. 8 through 10. Here's it describing the Shmita cycle. You are to count off 7 Sabbaths of years, 7 Shmita of years, okay? 7 times 7 years, so that you have the time of 7 Sabbaths of years, namely 49 years, 7 Shmita cycles, right? You shall then sound a ram's horn. What's a ram's horn called? Shofar, okay? On the 10th day of the 7th month. On the Day of Atonement, you shall sound a horn throughout your land. What's that? That brings in the year of Jubilee. You shall consecrate the 50th year and proclaim a release or a Shmita throughout the land to all its inhabitants. It shall be a Jubilee for you, and each of you return to his own property, and each of you return to his own family. Now here's the question. Here's what the rabbis argue about. And think of it this way. Okay, here's 49 years, 7 sevens of, okay, of, this is the whole Shmita, 7 years, 7 Shmita cycles. And then you have the 50th is what? Yeah, Jubilee. Now, makes sense. Then you start the cycle again. Another 49 years, okay? And then after that, 49 years, what do you have? Jubilee. So that means the Jubilee will occur every what? What was it? Every 50 years, right? 49 years and the 50th is Jubilee. Then you start the Shmita cycle again, right? 49 years and then Jubilee. So every 50 years is a Jubilee. Now, here's the interesting part. Okay, so that's 50 years and that's 50 years. All right, makes sense. And that's probably where most people count it as a 50-year cycle. But then the rabbis, they always debate about everything. What if, and it's not clear, I've looked for it, I've read it, and it doesn't say explicitly. What if you have 49 years, right? And then what's the 50th year? Jubilee. But what if that Jubilee was the first year of the next 49-year cycle? Get it? Then here's my question. Yes, then every 49 years is a Jubilee. So you have a 50-year cycle, 49. Which one's true? Remember, as Gentiles, we think it's got to be one or the other, right?
Yeah.
Wrong. It is. Thank you, Lisa. I love it. I love it when people set me up like that. Okay. You would think, but you know my famous saying where, which one's right? Both. And here is evidence that it's a 49-year cycle, because he said 70 weeks are determined for you and your people. It's Shabuim, which could be weeks, but if you have a Gentile mindset, well, that's 70 weeks. These theologians that try to fit everything into a 490-day period, you can't. It's ridiculous because they're taught to think like Gentiles, whereas if you have the more Jewish, like with the Shmita, Shabuim is just a set of 7. It's a heptat. And it could be a week of years. So, but that's how many years? 490 years, which indicates what? The 49-year cycle times 10, right? Okay. And how long were they exiled to Babylon? 70 years. Because for 490 years, they didn't keep the Shmita. What does that indicate? That it's a 49-year cycle. Because that's 10 cycles of 490. And in fact, I'll show you later where God dealt with the whole history of Israel in 4 periods of 490 years, believe it or not. You can figure it out from Scripture. For some reason, he set it down into 4 periods of 490 years. Okay, again, what does God work in? Patterns. Seriously, I get so frustrating talking to some people. But anyways, I'm serious. But it's patterns, and he's given it to us. But we look at the Old Testament, that old archaic book full of laws and stuff. What does it mean to us today? Actually, it means a lot. So indirectly, if we could find the year of the Jubilee, which refers directly to his second coming and the Jews repenting and him setting up the kingdom, indirectly we can find out when the rapture is. There has been 6,000 years of human history, right? And then the 7th 1,000 year is what?
The millennial reign.
The millennial kingdom, correct. You see that pattern?
Yeah.
7, a set of 7 of days, a set of 7 of years, a set of 7 in millennials, period. So for me to pull that across here should not surprise anybody. Plus, just look at what's happening. I mean, it's obvious it's going to happen soon. Okay. Yeah. So God works in patterns. So that tells me, and again, one of these things that I'm hoping that we get through is simply that God has everything wired. Are we going to face some hairy stuff here in 2023? Yeah. I'm not even worried about it. Okay? It's just like, you know what? That's Satan's plan. But when we meet together, we're going to look at God's plan. But actually, I like to contrast, not only order with balance, but balance with radicalism. So, what's more radical than Deuteronomy 6, 4, and 5? Hear, O Israel, the Lord is God, the Lord is the only one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your strength. That's pretty radical, isn't it? That's not, oh man, if I love God with 95% of all those, I'd be ahead of most Christians. Way ahead, I think. But that doesn't make the grade. That doesn't make the grade. He wants all of it. It's a complete radical given over. Like the Apostle Paul, think of him. Beaten, whipped, shipwrecked, everything. He would never stop. Period. He'd go before kings and rulers and just give them the gospel. No fear. That's pretty radical, right? What is 40 in Gematria? The study of numbers in the scriptures. 40 represents a time of trial, testing, right? A time of, remember how long was the wilderness wanderings? Wandering, okay? Now, watch this. You're not going to find this on the internet. Here's the question. If there's a 49-year cycle and there's a 50-year cycle, I got to come up with a good reason, okay, for the starting date of both. And what if they both ran at the same time? Okay, they were just going down through history at the same time. So, I can't give you all the evidence now. In the year 30 AD, Jesus rode into Jerusalem. And a few days later, he was crucified. When he rode into Jerusalem, he rode in he was on a donkey, which is king. It's the only time he presented himself as the Mashiach king, the Messiah king. Other times, like in John, when they tried to take him and make him king, what happened? He said, no, he just disappeared through the crowd. Because it wasn't the right time. There's one special day. In fact, this is the day that the Lord has made. Read it in Psalms. It doesn't refer to any day. It refers to the day that he offered himself as king. Okay? So, he did that in 30 AD. I'll give you a quick reason why. I'm going to give you documentation where in the Jewish writings, now we know 70 AD is set. What happened in 70 AD? The Romans come in, ransack Jerusalem, kill like 1 million Jews, and they destroy the temple. And the diaspora happens, the dispersion. Okay? And if you go, I got like 6 or 7 references where they say, and they call it the Great Destruction. They say 40 years before the Great Destruction, this happened. Strange things happened in the temple 40 years before the Great Destruction. So if the Great Destruction happened in 70 AD, when did those strange things start happening? 30 AD. Okay, right here. And there's stuff like the lot for the scapegoat came up in the wrong hand 40 times in a row. Okay, came up in the left hand instead of the right hand, which is considered unlucky. Yes, all documented. How could you get something 40 straight years? You know what I'm saying? And for 40 straight years, when they got the ribbon from the scapegoat and tied it around the temple door, they come back after the scapegoat was let go, and they looked at the ribbon. It was red. It was white. Just like in Isaiah, 1:8, though your sins be as scarlet, they shall be white as snow. The red ribbon would always turn white. But what happened? For 40 straight years, it remained red. Their sins weren't washed away. And there's other, but anyways, that kind of points to 30 AD. Plus, that means that was the year that Jesus offered the kingdom. And he could only offer it in a Jubilee year. Got it? And this is the 50-year cycle. Now, the other thing is, people say that you can't do the Jubilee if the Jews are out of the land. It becomes a 49-year cycle. Or some just say it's a 49-year cycle. When were the Jews kicked out of the land? 70 AD. Okay, 49-year cycle. 49-year cycle here, because they're kicked out of the land in 70 AD. 50-year cycle here. Now, watch this closely. Okay, 70-year cycle, or 49-year cycle, it starts in 70 AD, they're out of the land. A 50-year cycle in 30 AD. They both intersect in one Jubilee in 2,000 years. Well, let's see here. You have to go exactly 40, the time of testing. They've been wandering the earth for 40 Jubilees since they rejected the Messiah. And that takes you to what year? 2030 for the Jubilee. If you start right here in the year 70 AD, make it a 49-year cycle, guess what year do you end up with the year Jubilee? 2030. In both cases. Because it just so happens, if you look at mathematically, these events are separated by 40 years. And so what happens is this 49-year cycle after 40 Jubilees, and that 1 year missing, will, get down to the same cycle as this. They both intersect in 2030, the year Jubilee when Jesus returns. Now, if that's valid, so 2030 minus 7, let me see, what is that? Anybody have a calculator? Scott? Oh, 2023. Not haphazard. They say you don't do the Jubilee, or it doesn't count when the Jews are out of the land. They were kicked out in 70 AD. Whether that cycle was already going and intersected there, or you just do it from there, or they are in the land but in unbelief, you come to 2030 as a Jubilee year, and then every 50 years, when Jesus offered it, that 50-year cycle goes to 2030, and that's the only time those two intersect in 2,000 years. And both are 40 Jubilees, which is representing the Jews wandering this earth, looking for their Messiah for 40 Jubilees. Just like for 40 years, they were disobedient to God in the wilderness. So they're in the wilderness now, this world. Okay? Does everybody kind of got that one? It is. And that was my whole thing. It's a pattern. Is that valid? I'm telling you the truth. I didn't get that off the internet or anything. It just, I was thinking 49, 50, 49. Hey, 70 AD. I almost hit the floor when I came to 2030. What's Satan's main tactic? Job 2:4. What does he use? Woo! Oh, you're cheating. Okay. Fear. When he stood before God, he talked about Job. He said, skin for skin, all that a man has, he'll give for his life. Right? Job 2:4. And yet, let me tell you something. In Philippians 1:29, it says something really weird. It says, it has been granted or given to you as a favor, a show of favor, or it's a blessing. It says it's been granted to you for Christ's sake, not only to believe in him. I like that part. It's granted to us as a favor, as a blessing to believe in him, but also to suffer for his sake. Wait a minute. That second part, it's a blessing. It's a bestowing of something that's special because God loves you, and that is suffering for Christ's sake. We don't know much about that in this country, do we? Not really. Not really. So, that's what we need to kind of look at and realize what's coming upon us. It's all going to be Father filtered. We may not live at the level that we'd like to, but that's okay. Because this is not our home. We are not earth dwellers. Remember that term in the book of Revelation? That's people who make their home right here on this earth. Earth dwellers. We're not that.